Season 2026 is now fully underway, and role quests have been doing a lot to stir up the metagame, as top, jungle, mid, ADC, and support have all been given quality of life improvements to make each role feel like they have a win condition to focus on. Even more exciting is that Riot declared 2027 would potentially feature the biggest slew of changes ever brought to League of Legends, which has been giving many people, myself included, something to look forward to as we play through Season 16. But what I find most intriguing about Season 16 isn't actually the role quests, interesting as they are, or anything new added to the game for that matter. Instead, what was taken out of the game. Generally speaking, even though features come and go on a perennial basis every year, remnants of content from past seasons are still within the game today. For example, even though the mythic item system has been discontinued, the game still retained the changes made to the item system at large, which contextually only makes what happened to Season 15's changes all the more fascinating. Near as I can tell, basically anything of major significance that was added in 2025 has been removed from the game, and for today, I wanted to take a retrospective analysis on the season Riot tried to make the community forget. What about Season 15 was so bad they felt compelled to erase it entirely? Giving you a point of reference as to just how meaningful this was, let's recap the main content introduced in every League season from 2015 to now. Back in Season 5, we were given the modern Summoner's Rift, changing the battle arena of the game to have better graphics and visibility. It also added some more system improvements to the jungle by introducing the different types of smite. Season 6 brought with it the Marksman class update, modernizing many ADCs to have the kits they have today. Alongside that, they added some major solo queue changes, not the least of which being the ability to actually declare what role you wanted to play. Season 7 featured the Assassin class update and changes to stealth, differentiating it between camouflage and invisibility. It also introduced plants to the game like Scrying Bloom, Honeyfruit, and Blastcone. Season 8 was a massive one, introducing the Runes Reforged system to replace the original Runes and Masters. Season 9 added 2 new ranks, Iron and Grandmaster, and lowered the number of divisions in each tier from 5 to 4. Furthermore, turret plating was added to the game, rewarding players for being more aggressive and proactive in lane. Season 10 oversaw the release of alcos in top and bot lane, which, while not utilized as much as they could be, fundamentally altered the structure of top and bot lane. Most critically, however, was the advent of the new Dragon Soul and Delta Trick system, offering damn near game-winning buffs to the team that managed to acquire them. Season 11 was of course the mythic item system and item system overhaul, redesigning basically every item in the game to centralize and streamline the build experience. Season 12 saw the inclusion of 2 new dragons being added to the game, Chemtech and Hextech. The former would end up being taken out very quickly, but was then later reinstated in Season 13. Finally, Season 14 was the first overall to Summoner's Rift in a very long time, reworking the structure of the map to be more symmetrical, as well as the inclusion of the new Void Grubs objective that precedes Rift Herald. Like I said, even if maybe 1 or 2 of the features in every season were taken out to make room for whatever Riot was aiming to include in the new year, the fact is they never took away the essence of what any season was trying to do, since the ultimate goal was to make League more and more complete and comprehensive with each passing year. Season 15 was both an attempt at trying something big for the game as well as an experimental shift in what exactly constituted a season. Rather than one major update per year with a smaller mid-season update to go along with it, they instead opted to split up the year into 3, beginning with Noxus and then later moving into Ionia. Content-wise, however, they sought to add new objectives to the game to increase engagement and interaction between teams, no doubt also for the purposes of making the game more entertaining to watch at top level. With that in mind, they introduced a new neutral objective, as well as an early game system that would give the rewarding team a permanent advantage over the enemy team, Atakhan and Feats of Strength respectively. With the benefit of hindsight, we know exactly just how detrimental these two things were towards the game's overall experience, but at the time, it raised a lot of interesting questions as to what extent Season 15 would alter the way we saw League. Being the 2 keystone features of 2025, I want to tackle each of them one at a time to not only explain them for posterity's sake, but also highlight the issues they added to the game. Beginning with Feats of Strength, I'm fairly certain most people remember what they are, but in case you're watching this a few years in and you need a refresher, the Feats of Strength was an early game competition between the 2 teams, wherein whichever team was able to acquire 2 of the 3 objectives before the other would be given a party-wide buff lasting for the remainder of the match. The 3 objectives were the first to score 3 champion kills, first to destroy a tower, and first to claim 3 neutral objectives. By winning at least 2 of the 3 objectives, the boots on each member of your team would receive a tiny stat increase, and as well be given the option to upgrade to their tier 3 counterparts. A decent idea at first glance, winning the Feats of Strength would give you and your team a measurable advantage just like any other objective, but it wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world if you lost it. The additional stats afforded to your team via tier 3 boots were about the same as a dragon or 2. All the same, however, it wasn't the actual reward that made this objective a problem, at least not by itself. Recall that when taking any objective into consideration, you have to factor in double the value of any specific buff, because not only does your team acquire the buff, but more crucially, the enemy team doesn't. In other words, it's more than just making sure your team gets the tier 3 boots, it's preventing the enemy team from getting them as well. One main Feats of Strength an issue was the psychological pressure of obtaining it. With the objective itself being centered around early game proactivity, it made early mistakes all the more consequential, since on top of the inherent benefits of acquiring first tower, being 3 kills up and getting early objectives, you now had to deal with the enemy team being that much more powerful through access to tier 3 boots. What's more is that the feats were not a tug-of-war battle wherein you can wrestle a feat from the enemy team later down the road. Once the team got it, there was no way you could take it back from them. For example, if you and your team got into a full-blown 5v5 and went 5-3, you may have won the team fight, but the enemy team could claim the feat of warfare if they scored 3 kills first. In fact, it was even worse than that. For the first couple weeks of 2025, it was actually the first team to get first blood, not 3 kills. People did all kinds of cheat strategies solely to get their hands on that. Same applied to the objective feats. Up until midway through Season 15, you had to get all 3 Void Grubs in order to earn progress. On some occasions, players would intentionally take only 1 Void Grub so as to prevent the enemy jungler from playing around topside. A common sentiment you may have heard throughout 2025 was how stressful the early game felt to play. Not that it wasn't before, but Season 15 was definitely the most mentally taxing to play due to Feats of Strength. It also put way too much emphasis on jungle diff, even more than prior seasons. Jungle was the only role that had influence over all 3 feats. Early game ganks would unsurprisingly make it easy for your team to score 3 kills. Naturally, the jungler was responsible for neutral objectives, and though laners could take down the first turret without direct jungle intervention, typically it would be easier to clear out the wave to give you time to push for tower if the jungler ganked you and/or secured Void Grubs. All in all, League became extremely, and I emphasize extremely early game centric, not just practically but also psychologically. Winning the Feats of Strength is by no means game ending, it never was intended to be. However, it was a major source of tilt for players, in other words, mental damage. Winning the competition didn't really make your life that much easier, but losing the competition was extremely discouraging. It was one more thing you didn't want the enemy team getting their hands on. From my own personal experience playing throughout 2025, I began to increasingly dislike the feat system. Mistakes in the early game are already punishing enough as is, but with this, you basically fell behind that much more. It was burdensome for every role. Junglers had to track each other like a hawk so as not to fall behind, meanwhile laners are forced to rotate for fights and evades even before they were ready. If they wanted to keep Feats of Strength in the game, they would have had to make it so both teams could acquire tier 3 boots instead of it being zero-sum where one team getting it meant the other team didn't. Much of the reasons why Feats of Strength were bad for the game carries over to Atakhan, only amplified several-fold. The recent objectives in League are more critical to focus on than back then is as a result of them being zero-sum. Prior to the advent of elemental drakes, the Dragon Slayer buff was a stacking one that both teams could stack throughout the course of a game. For that matter, it was also the only permanent objective in the game at the time. Even after elemental drakes came out, both teams had the potential to accumulate any number of drakes up until 35 minutes, where the Elder Dragon was spawned. Regarding the Baron buff, though it was a zero-sum objective in that one team getting it meant the other team didn't, it was kept in check by it being temporary, lasting for only 3 minutes. The opposing team just had to hunker down and hold out for a short while, and then both teams would reset back to a neutral state. To a lesser extent, Reptile was also a temporary buff. Sure, it could potentially result in a circumstantial advantage if you took down multiple towers and whatnot. That being said, once Shelly was taken out, you no longer had to worry about her anymore. It wasn't until recently when they started to add multiple lasting objectives that granted the acquiring team a permanent stat advantage over the team without it, making it that much more tilting when you lost them. Season 10 added the Dragon Soul, which, depending on which one it was, effectively won you the game on its own. Then in Season 14, they added Void Grubs, a lasting increase in tower taking potential. Worst of all though, Season 15 added not 1, not 2, but 3 new permanent objectives to the game. First and foremost, Blood Roses. These would afford every member of the team an increase in experience and adaptive force. No small amount either, having 30 to 40 more roses than your opponent was equivalent to like 20 bonus attack damage or 30 bonus ability power, amounting to multiple 4 figures in gold advantage. Then there was the Atakhan buff. Back when it was either Ruinous or Voracious Atakhan, both of them were extremely valuable for the team. The former amplified the effects of all of the neutral objectives you had, whether Dragon, Reptile, Void Grubs, Baron, or the Blood Roses. And speaking of which, it would give you extra Blood Roses to farm. Voracious Atakhan was the most egregious of all though. While it was a temporary buff, what exactly it gave was just so incredibly overpowered it would typically lead to your team gaining such an overwhelming macro advantage. A party-wide instant revive that didn't give kill credit to the enemy team made it so you could literally fight a 5v5, and even if you lost the fight, like went 3 for 5, you would all instantly respawn, thus turning what should have been a 2v0 into a 2v5, making it super easy for your squad to take Baron or whatever objective was available at the time. Thornbound Atakhan wasn't any better. It would give you a metric ton of blood roses and convert them into spirit petals, which essentially were stronger roses. Then it would cause all takedowns to emit a pulse of energy around the fallen champion to damage all other nearby enemies for 15% current health damage and heavily slow them. It doesn't take a genius to know how game-changing that was, more so if your team met someone who could reset all takedowns like Samira, Viego, Katarina, or Master Yi. Heck, even if your team had no reset champions, an AoE 60% slow for 1.5 seconds alone would have been powerful, much less the fact that it did % current health damage. Taking out 2 members of the enemy team would do 30% current health damage to the remaining 3 members if they were close enough. All that is to say, it was extremely risky to take a 5v5 team fight against a team with the Atakhan buff. Keep in mind, both the buff and spirit petals are what made Atakhan so game-winning. I've seen plenty of matches where the winning team was ahead by like 5k gold and then took one bad fight, resulting in the losing team getting Atakhan and turning the entire game around off that. The stats afforded to you from Atakhan were potentially more game-altering than Baron, especially given the fact that it was permanent. It put so much stress on both teams to focus on these objectives that most of the time there was no real point to playing a game out if the enemy team managed to acquire both. Essentially, Atakhan was simply far too consequential a buff to only be afforded to one team and last for the entirety of the game. Compounding everything else that was permanent, Dragon Soul Void Grubs and Feats of Strength, and it just made the game way too demanding in terms of control and early game dominance. That isn't to say late game skillers was shit out of luck, more that obviously whichever team could establish an early game lead would have an easier time getting their hands on other objectives. Likewise, however, it also made those all the more punishing. For example, if you got 3 kills quickly, you would be in a good spot since Warfare was the most important of the 3 feats to get due to how easy it was to get. However, if the enemy team was somehow able to secure the other 2 feats, the game suddenly got a lot harder. By extension, you could be winning the first 20 minutes of the game, and by a significant margin at that. You won the feats, you had 2 dragons, both Void Grubs, Rift Herald, and all that. But take one bad fight at 20 minutes and give the enemy team Atakhan, and all that hard work basically goes up in smoke. I might be wrong, but it's actually statistically less painful to give up Baron than Atakhan. Altogether, my theory for why Season 15 was effectively stripped from the game in its entirety had much to do with it making the game way too focused on objectives and not actual player skill and coordination. Not that objectives shouldn't carry meaningful impact, more that I felt like games are decided on whichever team won objectives and not whichever team played more skillfully. It made alternate win conditions like split pushing damn near unviable since your team would be effectively forced to give up every objective by fighting 4v5. Dragon Soul was tolerable due to being a late game objective. Dragons individually meant very little for the team, so you could afford to relinquish up to 3 dragons before you actually had to start worrying about it. Feats of Strength and Atakhan, however, were things you had to be concerned about immediately, forcing you to be mindful of them right from the start. It was a really degenerate game state that forced every team to play the game in a certain way, thus making Season 15 one of the most uninvented seasons in the game's history. Throughout 2025, a number of pro players, content creators, and such remarked on how League felt too sterilized. Champions and items are for the most part reasonably balanced, with no specific thing being too overpowered, and that Riot has become too conservative with the type of content that was being added to the game. It wasn't so much that champions and items weren't overpowered, rather that so much of the game's agency has been taken away in favor of these neutral objectives. It didn't matter what champions you played or what items you built, all that mattered was getting objectives, which was actually the main motivation behind role quests. Riot themselves acknowledged how overpowered jungle was compared to every other role when they were talking about it in the Season 16 video. Speaking of which, I for one think role quests are a better way to go about lasting objectives because it allows both players to gain the benefits of it eventually. Try to imagine it being a one-side only thing, like imagine only one top laner getting access to teleport and level 20, only one ADC being allowed to buy 6 items. That was practically what Atakhan and Feats of Strength were, near insurmountable advantages afforded to only one team that lasted for the entire game. Definitely a fascinating year for sure. It's the only season to my knowledge to have virtually all of its key features completely removed. I don't think any other season had to backpedal this hard before. But what do you guys think about all this? Do you think it was a good thing to take out Atakhan and Feats of Strength, or should they have kept it in the game and just try to rework it instead? Let me know in the comments down below. That'll be all for today. Apologies once again for how bad I sound in the video. I hope the next one will be a little bit better, but if you enjoyed nonetheless, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.